Okay. So, welcome to OutRight TV, a video and podcast series bringing you stories of LGBTIQ people and allies across the globe as we face this pandemic together. I am Yvonne Wamari, Africa Program Officer at OutRight Action International. And for today's episode, I'm talking to Rosie Nodoyo, a.k.a. Roxy from Kenya. Welcome, Roslyn.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Great. So, we're just going to get like right into it. I've known you for many years, so we have known each other and engaged in different professional and personal capacities for what about 10 years or so. So
Yeah.
I know quite a bit about you. So maybe you can tell our listeners a bit more about yourself. Who is Roxy? What do you do? What makes Roxy happy? What makes Roxy mad?
Okay, so that's what makes me happy. So I'm going to try and refrain from talking about myself in the third person, which I sometimes do. But especially these days, being with self-isolation. But yeah, so I am a queer rights activist, feminist, Pan-Africanist, woman. I identify as a woman that likes other people's babies um, and dogs,
Mhm.
and also in apparently cooking, which I have recently discovered. So those are the things that I'd say give me joy, like my nephews and my niece and all the babies in my life. And I'd say that the things that make me mad or trigger me are, I'm very big on like social justice. So injustice, inequality. I've always been the kind of person that if I felt something was wrong, I would just speak out about it. I don't like it when people are just mean or lack consciousness about other people around them. Yes, and maybe another pet peeve would probably be bad driving. I'm definitely those people that kind of really honk and do interactive driving on the road. Yeah. So,
Thank you. Thank
I that sums up who I am.
you. Perfect. Perfect. So now that we know a little bit more about my guest today, let's get into our discussion about the pandemic. Can you give the listeners insight into the situation in Kenya, both about the pandemic and the government response to the pandemic? Just what are your thoughts about that?
Okay, so in Kenya, uh, the cases that have been reported so far in the triple digits, as to the level of accuracy, there's a lot of uncertainty about how accurate those numbers could be because, again, our government, like a lot of governments around, are maybe afflicted with maybe either shortage in terms of the testing kits or just generally aren't prepared or weren't prepared um, for this pandemic, like a lot of governments. And so what has been reported so far is in the triple digits, with the deaths thankfully being still below double digits, at least the reported deaths. And so the government's response currently is, like a lot of responses, trying to enforce a lockdown, which means individuals do not get to cross between counties. We've been advised to social distance, which means staying at home. And they are also enforcing a curfew between the hours of 7 p.m. and 5 a.m. in the morning to limit movement. But then they've also taken other responses. They've also responded to the backlash or the downside of the pandemic by, for example, taking a look at the taxes. So they've reduced the tax burden on citizenry, and they're negotiating with banks regarding loans. There's directives that have been given to landlords, for example, to kind of ease up or negotiate what payment could look like with people who rent from them. So that has been on a positive note, at least. Yeah. And so people are generally, I'd say that there is naturally a lot of anxiety because a lot is still kind of unknown. It's people have been advised to wear masks when they leave the house and protect themselves as best as possible. But because everything is evolving quite quickly, I think that the Kenyan spirit is generally one of optimism, which can be both a good and a bad thing, because sometimes after a while people get a bit lax. But then hopefully we'll get through this. Yeah.
Great. You talked about a lot of the measures that have been put in place by the state, and you talked about enforcement. And I think when we looked at the first day of the curfew, and you saw the level of brutality that the police were meting on individuals because they were found on the street after 7, and it was just a few minutes, or a minute after 7. It was painful, it was horrific. And as a result, I think from that incident, I think it's 3 people who have since passed on from the brutality of the police during that time. So yeah, as much as the government is trying to put measures in place, I think our police force, what they call it, the police service, it should also be really checked on how this enforcement is happening.
Absolutely. I mean, aside from, you have to, or at least the government needs to recognize that Kenya, like a lot of countries on the continent, is a blue collar economy state, which means that a lot of people depend on daily wages in order to survive. And therefore, the curfew, in as much as it is purported to help flatten the curve, is not a reality for a lot of people who, to the point of risking their health, need to be out there in order to support their families. And so what happens when you have a situation in which impunity, there's a lot of impunity, and there's not a lot of responsibility taken in, especially by state actors such as the police, who themselves are also dealing with, their own multiple levels of frustration for whatever reason, then start to abuse the power that is given unto them. And then, that's where you've been seeing all these videos. People are being whipped like goats. Like, I mean, it's a bit, I agree. The approach that has been taken, whilst the intention is good, you honor good intention through your action. And if your actions do not reflect that good intention because they're malicious and because they actually end up doing harm, then it beats the whole purpose of having good intention to begin with.
Yeah. So what for you do you find the hardest to cope with or adjust to during this time?
Okay, so I like a lot of people, just kind of, I tend to be a homebody anyway. I'm not like, I love my own company and being on my own. But then, like a lot of people, when it's imposed and when you have to kind of isolate, it starts to take on a different feeling. And after a while, you start to dream about things that you never even used to really be interested in doing, like leaving the house on a Sunday afternoon and taking a walk. But that said, I'm also recognizing, I think something that this time has really elevated for me in terms of reminding me and raising raising my consciousness around is the multiple levels or the multiple platforms of privilege I exist in, because I'm talking to you from the safety of my home, and you know, I'm still employed and I'm still able to do my work. I'm able to call and have food delivered, for example, from the grocery store. And I'm also able to access health insurance, which is not a reality for a lot of my Kenyan family, for a lot of Kenyan people, especially for a lot of my Kenyan queer and sex worker community, because, you know, I think even in as much as sometimes I feel like mourning more and more these days, I'm trying to center myself in gratitude and just kind of an awareness of what is it that I can do with this privilege that I have. Yeah, because it's a lot.
Sorry, I think that's very true, and that's very on point, because when you think about like even the measures that we're being told to put in place, you know, wash your hands with running water for 20 seconds. The person who's living in informal settlements doesn't even have that access to water, let alone running water. And soap, you know, soap is a luxury for a number of people. You tell somebody about sanitizers, and that is something that's so foreign to them. And when you look at quarantine, you tell somebody, okay, fine, you're going to need to quarantine in a room in your home. Some people live in one room houses. So like for real, we are privileged to have some of these things at our disposal. So you said that you've learned how to like center yourself, and you're like more appreciative of a lot of things. What
Yeah.
would be like, can you just give us an example of a few of these things that you feel more appreciative about? The things that you have maybe took for granted prior, and now you really look at it from a different lens.
Um, so most people that know me know how much I love my mama.
Mm,
So, kind of having to be away from her for so long, and learning how to reconnect through longer, deeper conversations about our anxieties, and
mm,
sharing and coming together about our anxieties, both on chat as well as you know, phone calls, and also having to actively and willfully keep away from her,
mhm,
um, in a bid to do my part to protect her and protect myself, and other people we may both be in contact with. So I've been feeling really grateful for that, and for family generally, because there's a lot of people who are losing loved ones around the world.
mhm,
And so I feel like, you know, the opportunity to have family that's there and healthy and alive is amazing. I've also been really appreciating sunshine. So these days I go out to my balcony and stick my head out for like 10, 15 minutes to catch a bit of sunshine,
mhm.
vitamin D, you know. Also because, like, to be fair, you know, they're like, stock up on your vitamin D. I'm like, vitamin D, where are you? Here I am. Sunshine, yes, you know. Again, because there's a lot of countries, especially in the global north, that don't have the kind of weather that we do, you know. And so it kind of makes you appreciate like so many things about the weather. I've really been appreciating the time to be still and quiet. Whilst I do like, you know, being in my own company a lot of the times, sometimes you don't do it consciously. Like you do not bring your full awareness into what that means. But then when you really have no one to be with but yourself, you actually start to like learn and unpack a lot of
Mhm,
stuff about yourself that you had put to the side and always meant to get to but never quite got around to it.
mhm,
So I'd say, yeah, those are the things I'm really feeling grateful for. I'm feeling grateful for the opportunities at Aduhai, which is the organization where I work. We've been receiving a lot of emergency response requests or emergency grant requests
Mm-hmm.
from organizations that host LGBTIQ refugees. And these are people who, you'll find that there's situations where there's 20 people sharing a house, and then having to think about what that means in the context of social distancing, in the context of their own security, and with the heightened anxiety around us, people um, are even more explosive, let's say volatile, in terms of their reactions to different things. And so that's another thing that I'm constantly grateful for, that I get to be safe, secure,
Mm-hmm.
and still feed myself and move my body and breathe. Oh my God, breathing. Breathing.
Yes,
Wow.
yes.
Yeah.
It's good to take care of yourself at this time. You're saying you're alone, and
Mm.
you've found a new sense of awareness on particular things and particular issues. But being alone also could be a bit difficult, especially as you said, when it's imposed. So, like, what creative things do you do to manage those instances? Maybe when you feel like, maybe I feel like I just want to go out for dinner.
Mm. Well, okay. I mean, that's interesting because living on my own is both a blessing, can be a blessing in disguise. So one of the things that I had to do, I think about 2 weeks ago, was I just needed to check my attitude about, like, everything that had been happening. It's not to say that feeling anxious or feeling frustrated is in any way wrong or should be negated, because those are very valid feelings. It's just I needed to get myself into a headspace that would enable me to go through each day as part of, like, kind of recognizing, or as part of my mental wellness practice. So for my own mental wellness, because I was starting to feel anxious and the anxiety was starting to get to me mentally. And sometimes for people who struggle with mental health from time to time, just the darkness sometimes in moments of silence tends to, like, creep in. And so one of the things, or some of the wellness practices I've been putting in place, which I feel really work for me, is meditation. 10 minutes of meditation, honestly, like, for me, has been a game changer. You can do meditation on different things. Sometimes it's just stillness. Sometimes it can be gratitude affirmations, where you center yourself on gratitude. Working out at least 30 minutes a day. You need to keep your body moving. Journaling. So I bought this Shonda Rhimes journal called The Year of Yes. Granted, I haven't been feeling it every day, but I've been trying, and I feel like journaling is such a healing process. And I journal about everything, my day, my thoughts, what challenges I experienced that day mentally, what I struggled with. And talking and connecting with family really helps, I find, because sometimes when you connect and you remind yourself that you're not in this alone. And finally, cooking. I have discovered my inner cook, my inner chef. You may call me Roxy, a.k.a. Roxy Ramsay, a.k.a. Roxy. Which other chefs do? Like, I've been feeling myself to the point that, like, I'll be streaming my cooking on Instagram to all my, like, 15 people watching and acting like I've been channeling, like, mad Gordon Ramsay up in here, and it's been it's been actually kind of nice, because you see people kind of watching and they'll be, like, commenting. Some of them will be dissing you or hating, but it's still love. Like, it's still people who are taking time out of their day to
Mhm.
kind of look at what you're doing. So yeah, that's what I'd say I've been doing. Yeah.
Yeah, great. I know I've watched a couple of your Instagram videos, some yummy, yummy food that you make. I'm like, okay. Uh,
I'm glad you think it looks yummy. That's not everybody's comment.
well, when you have what the nice crepes with the with the, what's it called?
Oh yeah, the
The sauce
blueberries
on
and the
it and
maple syrup on
berries.
there. Oh yeah,
Oh
yeah.
yeah, that speaks to my heart and my hips, you know. So great. So maybe one last question. What's the one thing you'd like to say to the world? What's the one thing, maybe one piece of advice or one piece of something that you would like to share with the world?
I would just like to share the message of encouragement and resilience uh, and just kind of awareness. Because again, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of people like sex workers whose livelihoods relied on physical interaction that are affected. There's a lot of people who, even before the pandemic, particularly from the LGBTIQ community, within a lot of countries on the continent that weren't able to access healthcare, and then more so now when it's needed, are in precarious situations because they aren't able to access jobs, they're not able to access healthcare, constantly fighting for their own personal physical, emotional, and mental security, maybe struggling in families or forced to be isolated with people um, who do not accept them. And so even as we are going through this, it's just a reminder that one, we are much stronger together. Every time that you are experiencing a high or like a good moment, just sending out positive vibes for those among us that do not have the same level of access or may not access the same things or have the same fortune, I think is a big part of the healing process. Because after this, we'll still need to rebuild, and rebuild we shall. Um, so yes, that would, I guess, be my message. Just one of resilience and encouragement and love, revolutionary love, as is the high motto, just revolutionary love. So hopefully this will not be going on for much longer.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Roxy. I don't have anything more to add to um, your words and your parting shot that you have shared with us. I think it speaks volumes what you have said. So thank you again, Roxy, for taking the time to speak with me today for OutRight TV, a podcast and video series which brings
Okay.
to light stories of LGBTIQ people and allies from across the globe as we face this pandemic together. So once again, I am Yvonne Wamari, the Africa Program Officer at OutRight Action International, and I was speaking to Roslyn Odoyo from Uhai, a queer feminist, as she stated. My colleagues and I will be back soon with more stories. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne.